The night my sister was dying, my mother looked at me like she had seen a ghost in surgical scrubs. I still remember the way her hand flew to my father's arm when I stepped through the trauma bay doors. Not gently. Not in shock the way people do in movies. She grabbed him hard enough that later, I was told, it left bruises in the shape of her fingers. Because the name stitched over my white coat was mine. Dr. Irene Wulette, chief trauma surgeon. And the woman bleeding out on that stretcher was my sister. 5 years earlier, Monica had told our parents I dropped out of medical school. She didn't say I took an approved leave. She didn't say I was caring for someone who was dying. She didn't say I was coming back. She told them I quit. Then she kept going. She said I had thrown my future away, said I was hiding things, said I had become someone they wouldn't recognize. And for reasons I didn't fully understand back then, my parents believed every word she said. They cut me off so completely it was almost clean. They blocked my number. They sent my letters back unopened. They missed my residency graduation. They weren't at my wedding. For 5 years, I was no one's daughter. Then one winter night in Connecticut, the hospital pager dragged me out of sleep at 3:07 a.m. Single vehicle collision. Female. Mid-30s. Blunt abdominal trauma. Unstable vitals. I threw on my scrubs, drove through freezing rain, and walked into Mercy Crest Medical Center thinking it would be another hard case, another long night, another family crying under fluorescent lights. I did not know the patient's name until I reached the trauma desk. I did not know my entire past was waiting on the other side of those double doors. And before I take you back to where it all began, let me say this plainly. If respect matters, subscribe. This story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when the truth survives longer than the lie. Tell me where you're listening from as you settle in. Because to understand why my mother looked at me that way, you have to go back to the fall of 2019. To a kitchen in Hartford. To a family that only knew how to love one daughter at a time. And to the last evening my father ever looked at me with pride. There were 2 daughters in our house, but only one of us knew how to be seen. Monica had that kind of presence people talk about long after she leaves a room. She could make a stranger feel like an old friend in under a minute. Teachers loved her. Neighbors remembered her. My parents, especially my father, lit up around her in a way that felt automatic, like breathing. I learned early not to compete with that. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. I was quieter. Not shy exactly, just internal. While Monica filled space, I stayed inside my own thoughts. I noticed patterns, details, things that didn't need applause to matter. Science made sense to me in a way people never quite did. At family dinners, Monica would tell stories. I would listen. At holidays, she entertained. I cleared plates. It wasn't that my parents were cruel. That would have been easier to understand. They were consistent, predictable. They valued what they could see, what reflected well, what felt effortless to admire. Monica was all of that. I was something you had to look closer to understand. And they rarely looked that closely. I remember one moment more clearly than the rest. 8th grade. State science fair. The only student from my school who qualified. I spent months on that project, late nights, weekends, every spare hour building something I thought might finally make them notice. That same weekend, Monica had a community theater performance. There wasn't a conversation. There wasn't even a question. They went to her show. When I came home with a second-place ribbon, I found it sitting on the kitchen counter where I had left it that morning. No note, no message, just where it had been. My father glanced at it later that night. "That's nice, Irene," he said, already turning back to the television. "That's nice." 5 years later, I would replay those 2 words more than the lie that destroyed everything. Because the lie didn't come out of nowhere. It grew in the space where I had never fully existed to them in the first place. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their attention. I told myself I would build something so undeniable that one day they would have no choice but to see me. And for a brief, fragile moment, they did. If you know what it's like to grow up feeling like you had to earn your place in your own family, you already understand where this is going. But what I didn't understand back then was what happens when the spotlight shifts and how dangerous that moment can be for the person who's about to lose it. The acceptance email came on a Tuesday afternoon, and for a second, I thought it was a mistake. I read it 3 times before it settled into something real. Oregon Health and Science University. School of Medicine. Accepted, 3,000 miles from Hartford, a place no one in my family had ever been, a future that didn't depend on anyone seeing me first. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just sat there at my desk, staring at the screen, feeling something quiet and unfamiliar expand in my chest. Possibility. When I walked into the kitchen and handed my father the printed letter, I watched his face carefully the way I always did, searching for the smallest shift. His eyebrows lifted. Oregon Health and Science, he said slowly, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. That's a real program. Then he looked at me, not past me, not through me, at me. And for the first time in my life, my father's attention didn't feel borrowed or accidental. Maybe you'll make something of yourself after all, Irene. It wasn't warm. It wasn't the kind of praise other kids grew up with, but it was direct, and I held on to it like it was oxygen. That night, my mother called 3 different people. Irene got into medical school, she said, her voice carrying something I had never heard before when she spoke about me. Pride. At dinner, something shifted in the air. The questions were directed at me. What city is it in? How long is the program? When do you leave? I answered everything carefully, trying not to sound too eager, too relieved, trying not to break whatever fragile thing had finally turned in my direction. And then, almost without thinking, I looked across the table at Monica. She was smiling, perfect posture, soft expression, the kind of smile that photographs well. But it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were still, measuring, recalculating. I didn't know how to read that yet. I thought she was just tired from the drive. That week she started calling me. At first, it felt like something I had always wanted finally arriving late. Tell me everything, she said. Your classes, your schedule, what kind of people you're meeting. And I did. I told her about the campus, about the professors, about the pressure I already felt before even starting. She remembered details, asked follow-ups, checked in again a few days later. For the first time, it felt like I had a sister who was actually interested in my life, not performing closeness, participating in it. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't then. Some of you listening have experienced this exact shift. The moment someone starts paying attention not because they care, but because something about you has changed the balance. I thought we were finally becoming sisters. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly handing her every piece of information she would later use to erase me. By the time I moved to Portland, I believed something between Monica and me had changed for good. Distance has a way of softening old dynamics, or at least, that's what I told myself. 3,000 miles felt like a reset. No comparisons at the dinner table. No silent scorekeeping. No watching who my father looked at first when he spoke. Just me, a new city, and the version of myself I had been trying to grow into for years. Medical school was everything people say it is. Demanding, relentless, precise. There's no room to drift, no space to disappear. And for the first time in my life, that worked in my favor. Because here, effort mattered. Here, no one cared who my sister was. They cared if I showed up prepared. If I could think under pressure. If I could keep going when I was exhausted. I made friends, slowly. Not easily, but intentionally. And eventually I met Sarah Mitchell. Sarah didn't come from a family like mine. She didn't come from much of a family at all. Foster system, group homes. A life built without anyone consistently choosing her. And yet, she had this way of seeing people, really seeing them, that felt almost disarming. The first time we studied together, she looked at me over a pile of anatomy notes and said, "You don't have to prove anything in this room, you know." I remember laughing it off, but something about it stayed, because I had spent my entire life proving things in every room. Sarah didn't ask for explanations. She didn't need backstory. She just treated me like I was already enough. And that kind of acceptance, it changes you quietly. We became inseparable after that. Late nights studying. Early mornings before exams. Coffee that was more necessity than comfort. And in the middle of all that, I still called Monica. She was consistent. Checking in, asking about Sarah, remembering details. How's your roommate doing? Did that exam go okay? Are you eating enough? It felt real. Like I finally had something stable back home. Like maybe the distance had made us better. And every time I shared something personal, something stressful, something uncertain, I felt a small sense of relief. Like I wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. If you've ever had a relationship that slowly earned your trust piece by piece, you know how easy it is to stop questioning it, to stop protecting certain parts of yourself, to believe that consistency means safety. That's what I believed. By my third year, Sarah wasn't just my roommate. She was my anchor. And Monica wasn't just my sister. She was the one person back home I thought I could still rely on. So when everything started to fall apart, she was the first person I called. And that decision was the one that changed everything. The diagnosis came in August, right before the semester was supposed to begin. Stage IV pancreatic cancer. No warning, no slow lead up. Just a sentence that rearranged everything in the room the moment it was spoken. Sarah didn't cry when the doctor said it. She nodded, asked a few questions, then sat very still like she was trying to hold her body together from the inside. I remember thinking this is the moment people talk about. The moment life splits into before and after. And I knew, without needing to say it out loud, that I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I went straight to the dean's office. I explained everything. The diagnosis, her lack of family, the fact that she had no one else. There was no hesitation. He approved a formal leave of absence on the spot. 1 semester, caregiver status, my place in the program secured, everything documented, everything legitimate. There was nothing unclear about it. I moved into Sarah's apartment that same week. Chemotherapy appointments, medication schedules, nights where the pain came in waves so strong she couldn't speak through it. I learned how to read monitors, how to anticipate side effects, how to sit in silence without trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I made a decision I would later replay more times than I can count. I called Monica. I don't fully know why. Maybe because she had been consistent. Maybe because I needed someone from home to know what was happening. Maybe because part of me still believed she was the version of a sister I had started to trust. I told her everything. About the diagnosis. About the leave of absence. About the paperwork. About my plan to return in the spring. There was a pause on the line. Then her voice softened in a way that felt almost protective. Oh my God, Irene. I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the kitchen counter. Take all the time you need, she continued. You're doing the right thing. Something in my chest loosened. I won't say anything to Mom and Dad, she added gently. They'll just worry. That part should have made me pause. But it didn't. Because it sounded like understanding. It sounded like support. It sounded like someone finally choosing me without conditions. So I thanked her. And I believed her. If you've ever trusted someone not because they proved themselves over time, but because you needed them to be trustworthy in that moment, then you already understand how quiet that mistake feels while you're making it. 3 days later, my phone rang at 1 p. And everything I thought was still intact collapsed in under 5 minutes. I was sitting in a plastic chair beside Sarah's hospital bed when my phone lit up. Dad. It had been a while since he called me directly, long enough that for a second, I thought maybe something had happened at home. I stepped into the hallway to answer. Irene, he said. No greeting, no pause. Your sister told us everything. Something in his voice made my stomach drop before I even understood the words. Everything? What? I asked carefully. A short silence. Then, colder. The dropping out. The boyfriend. The lies. I pressed my hand against the wall. Dad, I didn't. Monica showed us the messages, he cut in. She showed us proof. Proof. I felt my heartbeat shift, like my body had missed a step. What messages? I said. What are you talking about? Irene, my mother's voice came onto the line, shaking. How could you lie to us for this long? I closed my eyes. Mom, please listen to me. I didn't drop out. I filed a leave of absence. I can send you the paperwork. I'm at the hospital right now. Monica said you'd say that, my father said. That stopped me. She said you'd have a story ready. For a second I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I realized in that moment I wasn't in a conversation. I was in a verdict. Dad, I can prove. Enough, he said. Flat. Final. Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth. The line went dead. I stood there in the hallway, staring at my phone. Call duration, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. That's how long it took for my parents to erase me. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor, back against the wall, the hum of hospital lights above me, voices passing in the distance like they belonged to another world. On the other side of the door, Sarah's IV monitor beeped steadily. Life continuing. While mine had just been removed. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A text. From Monica. I'm sorry, Irene. I had to tell them. I couldn't keep your secret anymore. I read it twice. Then a third time. There was no panic in her words, no confusion. Just something clean, controlled. Like this had already been decided long before that message was sent. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible understanding. She hadn't made a mistake. She had made a move. And I had handed her everything she needed to make it. If you've ever tried to explain the truth to someone who has already decided who you are, you know how impossible that space feels. But I didn't stop trying. Not yet. Because part of me still believed that if I could just make them listen, I could fix it. I tried everything. I need you to understand that part. Because when people hear a story like this, they sometimes imagine distance, silence, pride, like I just let it happen. I didn't. Over the next 5 days, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 went to voicemail. By the 4th, my father's number was blocked. My mother blocked me 2 days later. I sent emails. The first one was short, clear, direct, controlled. The second one was longer, detailed. I attached the official leave of absence paperwork, included the dean's contact information, listed the hospital where I was staying with Sarah, named her oncologist. Everything a reasonable person would need to verify the truth. Neither email got a response. I wrote a handwritten letter, 3 pages, careful handwriting, no accusations, just facts. I mailed it priority from Portland. 5 days later, it came back. Unopened. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope before I even touched it. That was the moment something inside me started to go quiet. Not break, just go quiet. I called my Aunt Ruth. She was my father's younger sister. The only person in my family who had ever looked at me like I mattered without needing proof first. She listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't question. I'll talk to him, she said. 40 minutes later, she called me back. Her voice was heavier. Irene, he told me to stay out of it. I swallowed. What did you tell him? I told him about the leave. About your school. About everything you said. And? A pause. He said you've made your bed. I leaned my head back against the wall. 5 days. 14 calls. 2 emails. 1 letter. 1 person who tried. Every door. Closed. And here's the part that took me longer to admit than anything else. This wasn't new. This wasn't some sudden misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. This was a pattern. Every time Monica spoke, she was believed. Every time I explained, I was questioned. Every time something didn't add up, no one checked with me first. They had already decided, long before this, whose version of reality counted. This was just the first time it cost me everything. On the 6th day, I stopped calling. Not because I didn't care, not because I gave up on them, but because I realized they had already given up on me, and they had done it without needing proof. If you've ever reached that point, where you stop trying not because you're done loving someone, but because you finally understand they're not trying to hear you, you know how quiet that decision feels. No closure, no resolution, just silence. And in that silence, I turned back toward the only thing still in front of me. Sarah. Because while my family had chosen to believe a lie, there was someone in the next room who needed me to stay real. Sarah died on a Sunday morning in December. There was no dramatic moment, no final speech, no music swelling in the background. Just the soft, steady beep of the monitor. And then, nothing. Flat. The room didn't change right away. The light still came through the window the same way. The chair I had been sleeping in was still pulled close to her bed. Her hand was still in mine. But something essential was gone. I sat there longer than I can measure now. Not crying. Not moving. Just existing in the space where she had been. I was the only one in the room. No family to call. No one waiting in the hallway. No one asking questions. Just me. And that silence again. The same kind I had felt 5 days after my parents stopped answering. Only this time, it was heavier. Because this silence wasn't chosen. It was final. I arranged everything. The paperwork, the small service, the details no one ever prepares you for. 6 people came. A former foster sister drove in from Eugene, 2 classmates, a nurse who had taken care of her during chemo. That was it. The chapel could hold 60. 54 empty seats. I stood at the front, holding a piece of paper I had rewritten 3 times because nothing felt like enough, and I read her story out loud to a room that barely echoed it back. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I had been breaking for months already, and there was nothing left to release. That night, I went back to the apartment. Our apartment. Her mug was still on the counter. Her jacket still hung by the door. I stood there for a long time, not sure what to do with my hands, my thoughts, my life. Then I opened her copy of Grey's Anatomy. We had joked about it, how she would outlive the textbook out of spite. There was a yellow sticky note tucked into the chapter on the pancreas. Her handwriting. Uneven. Slower than it used to be. Finish what you started, Irene. Become the doctor I know you are. And don't let anyone, especially your own blood, tell you who you are. I sat down on the floor. And for the first time that day, I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel something move again. If you've ever lost someone who saw you clearly when no one else did, you understand this kind of grief. It doesn't just take a person. It takes the version of you that existed in their eyes. But it also leaves something behind. A responsibility. A quiet kind of promise. And sitting there on that floor, with that note in my hands, I realized something I hadn't been able to see through all the noise before. I had 2 choices. I could collapse into everything I had lost, or I could build something out of what she had left me. And for the first time since that phone call 5 days into the lie, I chose. I went back in January. No ceremony, no announcement, no one waiting for me to return. Just a form submitted online, a confirmation email, and a quiet decision to keep going. The campus looked the same. The buildings hadn't changed. The same early morning fog sat low over the walkways, the same hum of students moving between lectures, the same pressure hanging in the air like something you could almost touch. But I was different. There's a version of you that exists before everything falls apart. And then there's the one that comes after. I didn't have a family to call anymore. No one to update. No one asking how it was going. So I stopped narrating my life out loud. I just lived it. I took out additional student loans, picked up a research assistant position in the evenings, ate more hospital cafeteria food than I'd ever admit to anyone who didn't live that life. And I worked. Not in a dramatic, inspiring way. In a quiet, relentless way. The kind that doesn't look impressive from the outside but builds something real over time. Medical school doesn't slow down for grief. Exams don't reschedule because your life collapsed. Clinical rotations don't shorten because you spent the night sitting on a bathroom floor trying to breathe through something you don't have words for yet. So I learned how to carry it. Not fix it. Not resolve it. Just carry it. If you've ever had to keep functioning while something inside you was still breaking, you know exactly what that looks like. There were nights I cried in supply closets, not because something specific had happened that day, but because everything had happened, and there was nowhere else to put it. And then I would wash my face, go back out, and continue. Somewhere along the way, something shifted. Not the pain. That stayed. But the meaning of what I was doing. At first, I thought I was finishing this for Sarah, and in many ways I was. But slowly, almost without noticing it, I started doing it for myself too. For the version of me that had been overlooked, dismissed, redefined by someone else's words. I didn't need my parents to witness it anymore. I didn't need their approval to validate it. Because the work itself was proof. I graduated on time. No one from Hartford came. No phone calls. No messages. No acknowledgement. Just a name read aloud in a crowded auditorium. And silence where family should have been. But that silence didn't stop me anymore. Because by then, I had already learned something most people spend their whole lives trying to understand. You don't become real when someone finally sees you. You become real when you stop needing them to. And that realization is what carried me into the next chapter of my life. I matched into a surgical residency back on the East Coast, Connecticut, closer to home than I had been in years, but not close enough to feel like I was returning to anything. Mercy Crest Medical Center, Level 1 Trauma Center, fast, unforgiving, precise. The kind of place where hesitation costs time, and time costs lives. It was exactly where I needed to be. Surgery doesn't ask who you were. It doesn't care about your past. It doesn't measure you against someone else. It only asks one question. Can you do this right now? And for the first time in my life, that was enough. That's where I met Dr. Margaret Thornton. Maggie, 58 years old, built like she had been carved out of discipline and patience. She didn't smile much, didn't waste words, didn't tolerate excuses. And for reasons I didn't question at the time, she chose me. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in the way she watched my cases a little closer, corrected me more precisely, trusted me with responsibility earlier than most residents. You think too much, she told me once, standing across from me in the OR. I blinked behind my mask. Good surgeons think, I said. She shook her head. Good surgeons decide. That stayed with me, because I had spent most of my life overthinking every reaction, every word, every space I stepped into, trying to anticipate how to be accepted. In surgery, that doesn't work. You don't get to hesitate. You don't get to second guess. You act. And slowly, something in me adjusted. Not hardened. Sharpened. Maggie never asked about my family. Not once. And I never offered. But there were moments, small ones, where I felt something that didn't have a name yet. Like when she handed me a case that should have gone to someone more senior. Or when she stood beside me during a difficult procedure and said quietly, "Stay with it, you've got this." No praise. No softness. Just belief. And that was enough. Because belief, when it's real, doesn't need decoration. Some of you listening have had someone like that. Not a parent, not someone obligated to care, but someone who chose to invest in you anyway. Those people change the trajectory of your life in ways you don't fully understand until much later. Residency was long, brutal, transformative, and somewhere between the overnight shifts, the impossible cases, and the quiet moments where I realized I could do things I once thought were out of reach. I built something I had never had before, not just a career, a foundation, one that didn't depend on anyone else's version of me. And for a while, that was enough. Until someone walked into my life who didn't just see what I had built, but understood what it had cost me to build it. I met Nathan on a Tuesday afternoon that didn't feel important at the time. He was sitting in the corner of a community clinic conference room, sleeves rolled up, reading through a stack of case files like he actually intended to understand every page. Most people skim. Nathan didn't. Someone introduced us in passing. Civil rights attorney, they said, nodding toward him. Does pro bono work with some of our patients? He looked up, gave a small nod, and said, "Nice to meet you, doctor." No double take at my last name. No recognition. No question. Just normal. That alone made me pause. We ran into each other again a few days later. Then again the week after that. Not intentionally at first. Just overlapping spaces. Shared coffee machine. The same hallway at the same time. And slowly, without either of us forcing it, conversation started to fill the gaps. He didn't ask invasive questions. Didn't push. Didn't try to read between the lines. He just listened. Really listened. The kind of listening that makes you realize how rarely most people actually do it. It took me longer than I expected to tell him the full story. Not because I didn't trust him, but because saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking about it didn't. And I had spent years learning how to carry it quietly. We were sitting in his kitchen when I finally did. No build-up. No careful lead-in. I just told him. About Monica. About the lie. About the phone call. About the 5 days. The silence. The wedding invitation that came back unopened. I didn't dramatize it. Didn't soften it. Just facts. When I finished, there was a moment where I expected something. A reaction. A judgment. A question. Instead, he just sat there, processing. Then he said 4 words. "You deserved better." That was it. No analysis. No advice. No attempt to fix something that couldn't be undone. Just a statement. Simple. Accurate. And somehow, enough. Because for years I had been surrounded by silence, denial, or distortion. No one had said it that plainly. That directly. That truthfully. Some of you listening know what it feels like to hear something you've needed for years in one sentence. Not dramatic. Not poetic. Just right. After that, things shifted. Not quickly. Not in a way that felt like a turning point, but steadily. We built something that didn't require explanation. Didn't require me to justify my past. Didn't require me to shrink or overperform to be understood. And for the first time, I experienced what it felt like to be chosen, without conditions attached. We got married on a Saturday afternoon. Small ceremony. Maggie's backyard. About 30 people. Nathan's father walked me down the aisle. I sent an invitation to Hartford. It came back the same way everything else had. Unopened. Aunt Ruth was there, though. She cried enough for 2 parents. And standing there, surrounded by people who had chosen to be part of my life, I realized something quietly without bitterness. Family doesn't always begin where you think it does. Sometimes, it's something you build, piece by piece, with the people who stay. Maggie handed me an envelope at the reception. Not during the speeches. Not in front of anyone. Just a quiet moment, off to the side, like it wasn't meant to be a big deal. "Don't open it yet," she said. I looked at her. "When should I?" "When you understand why you earned it." Then she walked away like that was the end of the conversation. I didn't ask questions. With Maggie, you learn quickly if she's not explaining something, it's because you're not ready for the answer yet. So I took the envelope home, put it in the top drawer of my desk, and left it there. Life moved forward. Residency became attending. Attending became responsibility. Responsibility became leadership. 5 years passed the way they tend to when you're building something from the ground up. Not slowly. Not quickly. Just completely. I became someone I wouldn't have recognized back in that kitchen in Hartford. Not just professionally, but internally, quieter in some ways, clearer in others. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from confidence, but from surviving things you once thought would break you. Nathan and I bought a house just outside the city. Nothing extravagant. But it had a porch that caught the morning light in a way that made everything feel softer at the start of the day. We got a golden retriever. I named him Hippocrates. Nathan insisted on calling him Hippo. He responded to both. Life, for the first time, felt stable. Not perfect. There's a difference. There's a kind of absence that doesn't disappear just because you've built something good. It lingers. Quiet. Subtle. Like a space at the table you stop setting over time but still notice on certain days. Thanksgiving. Birthdays. Moments where your life feels full. And yet, something is still missing. I didn't wake up thinking about my parents anymore. I didn't check my phone hoping for a message. But every now and then, I would feel it. That hollow space between what is and what should have been. Aunt Ruth still called every Sunday. We never made it formal. It just became routine. I didn't ask about my parents. Not directly. But she would mention things. Small updates. Careful ones. Your mom's doing okay. Your dad's been working less. Monica changed jobs. Divorced 2 years ago. Selling medical devices now. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Then one Sunday, her voice was different. More hesitant. "Irene," she said, "there's something I need to tell you about Monica." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Hippo pace near the door. "What is it?" A pause. Longer than usual. "It's concerning." Before she could continue, my pager went off. Sharp. Urgent. Cutting straight through the moment. Level 1, trauma. I glanced at the screen, then back at nothing. "I have to go," I said. "I'll call you back." I never got the chance. Because whatever Ruth was about to tell me was already on its way to me, at 60 miles an hour, running a red light, and within the hour, it would be lying on my operating table, bleeding, unconscious, and carrying my past straight into my present, whether I was ready or not. The pager went off at 3:07 a.m. There's a specific kind of silence that exists at that hour, thick, heavy, like the world is holding its breath before something breaks through it. I was asleep when it started vibrating on the nightstand. Nathan shifted beside me, half awake. Hippo lifted his head from the foot of the bed. I reached for the screen. Level 1 trauma, MVC, female, mid, 30S, hemodynamically unstable, ETA, 8 minutes. I was moving before I was fully awake. Scrubs, shoes, keys. Years of training compressing into muscle memory. By the time I was in the car, the rain had already started. Cold, thin, the kind that doesn't soak you immediately, but lingers long enough to make everything slick. The roads were empty. Streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. I ran the case in my head the way I always do. Blunt abdominal trauma. Internal bleeding. Possible splenic rupture. Liver involvement. Time sensitive. Everything about it was familiar. Routine, in the way only life or death situations can become routine when you've done them enough. I didn't think about anything else. Not my past. Not my family. Not the phone call I never returned. Just the case. That's the discipline surgery teaches you. You don't carry your life into the operating room. You leave it at the door. Or, you fail. I badged into the ambulance entrance and moved straight toward the trauma bay. My team was already assembling. Residents, nurses, anesthesia prepping in the background. The controlled chaos I knew how to move through without hesitation. I grabbed the intake tablet from the station, swiped open the incoming chart, and, for a second, everything stopped. Patient name: Monica Wulette. Dob. March 14. Emergency contact: Gerald Wulette, father. The sounds around me didn't disappear. They just moved further away. Like I was hearing them from underwater. Dr. Wulette? Linda's voice. Close. Grounding. You okay? I blinked. Looked up. The room snapped back into focus. I'm fine, I said. And I was. Not because it didn't matter, but because it couldn't matter right now. Prep Bay 2, I continued. Page Dr. Patel. I want backup. Linda nodded and moved. The machine was already in motion, and I stepped back into it. Because whatever Monica had done, whatever 5 years had taken from me, there was one truth that didn't change. There was a patient arriving in under 5 minutes who would not survive if I hesitated. Some of you listening understand this kind of moment. When your past collides with your present, and you don't get time to process it. You just get time to decide who you're going to be. The ambulance doors burst open. The stretcher came fast, and behind it, running, panicked, unsteady, came 2 people I hadn't seen in 5 years. My parents. I didn't look at them. Not yet. Because the only thing that mattered was the woman on that table, and whether or not she would still be alive. When the sun came up, they didn't recognize me at first. Not in that moment. Not with everything moving too fast, too loud, too urgent. To them, I was just another doctor in a room full of people trying to keep their daughter alive. The paramedics pushed the stretcher in hard. Female, mid-30s, single vehicle collision. Ran a red light. Significant abdominal trauma. BP dropping. 2 large-bore IVs in place. Blood on her shirt. Breathing shallow. One arm hanging off the side like it didn't belong to her body anymore. I stepped forward. Transfer on my count. 1, 2, 3. We moved her clean. Monitors connected. Vitals flashing. The room tightened around the numbers. And behind all of it, I could hear my mother's voice. High, fragile, breaking. That's my daughter, where are you taking her? I need to talk to someone. My father's voice followed, sharper. Who's in charge here? I want the attending now. Carla, one of our nurses, stepped in front of them. Sir, you need to wait in the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is handling this. The attending, my father repeated, grabbing her arm. Get me the doctor in charge. Carla glanced toward me. Her eyes flicked to my badge. Then back to me again. There was a split second. A silent question. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not now. She turned back to them, steady. The chief surgeon is already with your daughter. You'll be updated as soon as possible. The chief. My father's grip loosened slightly. My mother clung to his sleeve, her hands trembling. She's all we have, he said, his voice breaking just enough to be real. She's all we have. I heard it. Every word. And for a second, just a second, something inside me reacted. Not anger, not even hurt, just recognition. Because that sentence wasn't new. It was just the first time I had heard it out loud. I turned away. Let's move, I said. We're losing time. They were guided out, down the hallway, out of sight, and just like that, they were gone again. But this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I stepped into the scrub room, closed the door. 30 seconds. That's all I gave myself. Water running hot over my hands. The mirror in front of me reflecting a version of myself they had never known. Not the quiet girl at the kitchen table. Not the one who tried to explain. Not the one who called 14 times. This version didn't need to be believed. She just needed to be precise, Part of me, some small human part, thought about stepping back, calling Dr. Patel in, letting someone else take the case, letting them owe their daughter's life to a stranger. But that thought didn't last, because this wasn't about them, and it wasn't about Monica. It was about the person on that table, and the oath I had taken. I dried my hands, pulled on fresh gloves, and walked back into the room. Scalpel, I said, because in the end, who you are is what you do, when no one is asking you to prove it anymore. The surgery lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Time doesn't move the same way in an operating room. It stretches, contracts, disappears entirely. There's no past in there, no future either, just the next decision, the next movement, the next second that matters more than the last. Ruptured spleen, I said, already moving. Prep for removal. Blood pooled faster than we could clear it. Suction. Clamp. Retract. My voice stayed level. Not louder. Not sharper. Just steady. That's how you keep a room from tipping into panic. Liver laceration, grade 3. I could feel the shift in the team. This was where it got complicated, where precision mattered more than speed. But speed still mattered. Hold that. No there. Stay with me. The residents watched closely. They always do during difficult cases. But tonight, there was something else in the room. Not tension. Not fear. Focus. Pure, unbroken focus. Because when you're working on something this fragile, you don't get distracted by anything outside those walls. Not even your own history. Clamp. Good. Now suture slow. Don't rush this. Layer by layer. Control by control. We rebuilt what the impact had torn apart. And somewhere in the middle of all that, something became very clear to me. I wasn't proving anything. Not to my parents. Not to Monica. Not to anyone. This wasn't about showing them who I had become. This was just who I was. There's a difference. A quiet one. But it changes everything. If you've ever reached a point where you stopped performing your strength and just started living it, you know exactly what I mean. At 6:48 a.m., I placed the final stitch. Vitals? Stabilizing. BP coming up. Output clear. I stepped back. Exhaled. She's stable, I said. The room loosened. Not dramatically. Just enough. Dr. Patel, who had been standing at the back the entire time, pulled his mask down. That was flawless, he said quietly. I nodded. Thanks for staying. You want me to talk to the family? I peeled off my gloves, dropped them into the bin, walked to the sink, washed my hands the same way I had done thousands of times before. Routine. Controlled. Familiar. No, I said. I looked up at my reflection in the metal surface. The same face. The same name. But something had shifted. Not in how I saw myself. In how I understood what was about to happen next. This one's mine. Because for 5 years, I had been the daughter who disappeared. And now, I was the surgeon who had just saved her sister's life. Those two truths were about to meet. In a room. 40 feet away. And this time, no one could ignore either of them. The waiting room was quieter than I expected. Early morning light filtered through the windows, soft and indifferent to everything that had just happened behind closed doors. A television murmured in the corner. No one was really watching it, and in the center row sat my parents. They looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. Not physically, but something about the way they held themselves. Like the night had taken something out of them. I pushed through the doors. My steps were steady, measured. The same way I walk into any room where someone is waiting for answers. My badge was visible. My name clear. There was no hiding it. My father stood first. He always did. It was instinct for him. Control, presence, authority. Doctor, he said quickly. How is she? Is Monica? He stopped, mid-sentence. His eyes dropped to my badge, then lifted to my face, then back again. I watched it happen. Recognition doesn't always come as a realization. Sometimes it moves through someone like a physical force. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. My mother followed a second later. Her hand shot out, gripping my father's arm so tightly I could see the tension in her fingers. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. 5 seconds. That's how long we stood there. 5 seconds that held 5 years inside them. I spoke first. The same tone I use with every family. Calm, clear, clinical. Mr. and Mrs. Wulette, I said. I'm Dr. Wulette, Chief of Trauma Surgery. I saw it land. Your daughter sustained a ruptured spleen and a significant liver laceration. We performed emergency surgery. She's stable and currently in the ICU. I didn't rush. You'll be able to see her in about an hour. Mr. and Mrs. Not Mom. Not Dad. That mattered. My mother took a step toward me. Her face broke. Irene. Her arms lifted. Instinct. Emotion. Something reaching for what had been gone. I stepped back. Just half a step. But enough. She stopped. Right there. Her hands hung in the air for a moment, then slowly dropped. That was the first boundary. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just clear. My father's voice came out rough. You're a doctor. I am. You're the chief. I am. But Monica said. He stopped. Because for the first time, he didn't know how to finish the sentence. What exactly did Monica say? I asked. Not sharp. Not angry. Just direct. Silence filled the space again. Behind me, I could feel movement. Nurses. Staff. People who knew enough now to understand what they were witnessing. My mother's voice trembled. We thought, you dropped out. I held her gaze. She told you I dropped out, I said. That I had a boyfriend with a drug problem. That I was unstable. That I stopped contacting you. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. None of it raised. None of it needed to. None of that was true. My father looked at the floor. For the first time in my life, he had no immediate answer. No correction. No dismissal. Just silence. And if you've ever waited years to be heard, you know this moment. Not when they apologize. Not when they understand. But when they can no longer deny what's in front of them. That's when the truth finally has space to exist. And standing there, in that quiet, fluorescent room, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt clear. My mother was the first to break. Not loudly. Not all at once. It started in her face the way her expression shifted. Like something inside her was rearranging too fast to keep up with. Her hand moved from my father's arm to the back of a chair, gripping it for balance. The letters, she said, her voice barely holding together. You said you sent letters. I did, I answered. 2 words, simple, final. I sent 2 emails. I attached my leave of absence paperwork. I included the dean's number. I mailed a handwritten letter. You sent it back unopened. Her lips parted slightly. I recognized your handwriting. That landed differently. Not like an accusation. Like a memory she couldn't avoid anymore. My father still hadn't looked up. His hands were clenched at his sides, jaw tight, like he was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping through him. I called 14 times in 5 days, I continued, not raising my voice. You blocked me. Both of you. The room stayed quiet. No interruptions. No denial. Just the weight of it. Then he said it quiet, almost to himself. We thought you were lying. I nodded once. I know. That was the hardest part for them to understand. Not the facts. Not the timeline. But that I already knew what they had chosen. My mother's breathing became uneven. Irene, I lifted my hand again, gentle but firm. I hear that you're sorry, I said. But right now, I'm still your doctor. That stopped her. Not because it was cold, but because it was structured. Clear lines. Defined roles. Something they hadn't given me when I needed it most. I need to check on my patient, I added. You'll be brought to the ICU shortly. I turned before they could respond. Not to walk away from them, but to walk back into the part of myself that didn't collapse under unfinished conversations. The hallway felt longer on the way out, quieter, but not empty, because something had changed. Not in them yet. That would take time. But in me. For 5 years, I had imagined this moment. Replayed it in different versions. Angrier ones. Sadder ones. Versions where I said more. Versions where I said nothing at all. But standing there, saying only what was true, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't need them to understand everything. I didn't need an apology in that moment. I didn't need to be comforted or acknowledged or even believed anymore. Because I wasn't trying to return to who I had been. I wasn't standing there as the daughter they lost. I was standing there as the person I had become, with or without them. And that changed the entire weight of the room. When I pushed through the ICU doors, the air shifted again. Monitors. Soft footsteps. Controlled movement. I stepped into room 6. Monica was awake, barely, her eyes unfocused at first. Then slowly, they found me, and I watched in real time as recognition began to set in, just like it had for our parents. Only this time, there was nowhere for her to look away. Her eyes stayed on my face longer than they should have. Not because she couldn't look away, but because she was trying to understand what she was seeing. Irene? Her voice was thin, strained from surgery. Good morning, I said. I'm your attending surgeon. I watched the distance in that sentence land. You were in a motor vehicle accident. You had a ruptured spleen and a liver laceration. We operated. You're stable. She blinked slowly. You're a doctor. I am. Silence settled between us, filled only by the steady rhythm of the monitor. I can explain, she said. Of course. Even now. You don't need to explain anything to me, I replied, adjusting her chart. You need to explain it to them. Her jaw tightened. A small crack. I didn't think it would go this far. I paused, then met her eyes. For 5 years you made sure it went exactly this far. That was the moment something slipped. Not guilt. Not yet. Just the loss of control. And for Monica, that mattered more than anything. I checked her vitals again. Stable. You're going to recover, I said. No warmth. No edge. Just truth. I stepped back. Get some rest. Irene. I stopped at the door, but didn't turn. What? A long pause. Whatever she had planned to say, it didn't come, because there was nothing left to shape into a version that worked. I opened the door. My parents were standing in the hallway, waiting, watching. This time, I didn't stop. I walked past them and kept going. I heard them call my name as I passed. Not loudly, not the way they used to, when calling me meant expecting me to turn back immediately. This time, it sounded uncertain. Irene, my mother's voice. Soft, fragile. I slowed for half a second. Not enough to stop, just enough to acknowledge that I had heard it. Then I kept walking, because for years, I had been the one chasing after conversations, asking to be heard, trying to explain. This time, I wasn't running toward anything, and I wasn't running away either. I was choosing where I stood. Behind me, I could hear movement. Footsteps. My father's voice, lower now. We need to talk to her. Not demand. Not command. Need. That was new. I reached the end of the hallway and paused near the nurse's station. Linda glanced up at me, her expression careful. You okay? She asked quietly. I nodded. I will be. And I meant it. Because whatever happened next, whatever they said, whatever they realized, whatever they regretted, none of it could take away what had already been built. Not the years. Not the work. Not the person I had become without them. That part was no longer fragile. I turned back slightly, just enough to see them from a distance. My parents stood outside Monica's room, not speaking, not moving, just there. For the first time in a long time, they looked like people who didn't know what to do next. And maybe that was where the truth actually begins, not when it's revealed, but when no one knows how to avoid it anymore. I didn't go back to the waiting room that morning. I went back to work. Rounds, notes, another patient in Bay 3 who needed a consult. Life didn't pause just because mine had folded in on itself for a few hours. By noon, the hospital felt normal again, but something had shifted beneath that normal. Not loud, not dramatic, just irreversible. 5 years ago, I stood in a hallway asking to be believed. Today, I stood in the same kind of hallway knowing I didn't need to be. My parents had the truth now, not from me begging, not from evidence they could ignore, from what they had seen with their own eyes. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be about proving anything. It would be about whether they were ready to face what they had chosen. For the first time, that decision wasn't mine to carry anymore.